They'll say you changed. They'll whisper that you've become distant, hard, unreachable. But they don't see the hours you spent holding things together that were never yours to carry. They don't remember the second chances you gave after your soul was already exhausted. You're not cold, you're not cruel, you're not heartless. You're just done explaining, done bending, done sacrificing your peace to keep chaos comfortable. This isn't a winter in your heart, it's the warmth of finally choosing yourself. The quiet exit is not cruelty, it's clarity. There comes a moment when words no longer serve you, when explanations begin to feel like self-betrayal. You've talked, pleaded, reasoned, and nothing changed. Not the way they spoke to you, not the way they dismissed your feelings, not the way they made you feel like your kindness was a weakness. So, one day, not out of anger, but from sheer clarity, you stopped. No grand speech, no dramatic farewell. You simply pulled your energy inward. You retreated quietly, and that silence, oh, that silence was louder than any confrontation. They called it cold. They said you became heartless. But they never stopped to ask why. Because asking would mean facing the truth of how many times they took advantage of your warmth, of how long you stayed, hoping your loyalty would be enough to spark a change. They don't see it, but your exit wasn't revenge, it was revelation. You saw what they never would. That love without respect is just manipulation in a prettier costume. That your presence was being used, not honored. That your compassion was being consumed by people who fed off your forgiveness like it was endless. You used to think walking away without explanation was cruel. Now you know. It's necessary, not for them. For you, because continuing to engage, continuing to argue, to justify, to prove you were hurting, that only kept you in a story that was never going to be written with dignity. You realized that real peace doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors. Real peace simply packs its bags and closes chapters without applause. And maybe they'll never understand. Maybe they'll tell others you're heartless, that you switched up, that you think you're better now. Let them, because you're not walking away to make a statement. You're walking away to reclaim silence, to protect what little of yourself you still recognize. And in that silence, there is no guilt, only freedom. You're not disappearing out of spite. You're detaching with grace. You're not turning cold, you're turning inward, toward healing, toward rest, toward people who won't make you explain your worth to them in every conversation. You've outgrown the performance, the need to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. That's not ego, that's evolution. And if your absence feels like punishment to them, it only means your presence was a gift they never deserved to mishandle. Let them wonder, let them rewrite the story in their own heads. You don't owe anyone a final chapter when they never valued the pages you bled for. You're not cold, you're done. That's not the same thing. One is a reaction, the other is a resolution. And when you choose clarity over chaos, peace over proving, and self-respect over self-sacrifice, you don't need to explain why you left. You just leave and let your silence say what your voice no longer will. Emotional fatigue is not bitterness, it's a boundary. They say you've become distant, less talkative, less involved. They say there's something different in your eyes, now a stillness they can't quite name. And they call it bitterness, but they're wrong. What they're seeing isn't resentment, it's not rage, it's not a hardened heart. It's exhaustion, deep soul-level exhaustion. You're not mad, you're emptied. You've given and given until your spirit whispered, enough. You used to carry the emotional weight for everyone holding their chaos while they ignored your silence. You'd stay up late trying to solve problems that weren't even yours, offering compassion to people who wouldn't offer you 5 seconds of reflection. And you did it not out of weakness, but out of love, because that's who you are, or rather who you were, before the fatigue set in. This fatigue isn't something sleep can fix. It's not about rest, it's about depletion. When you reach a place where your heart feels bone dry, where your empathy turns quiet and your responses become fewer, it's not because you're bitter. It's because you've finally set a boundary that your body had been screaming for long before your mind caught up. They call it detachment. You call it survival, because constantly pouring into others while receiving nothing but excuses, manipulation, or silence in return that will eventually silence even the most open heart. You didn't change overnight. You simply got tired of being the only one trying, and instead of exploding, you withdrew. Not because you stopped caring, but because you were tired of caring alone. People love the version of you that bleeds for them, cries with them, breaks with them, but they recoil when you say, "I can't do this anymore." They want your kindness, not your boundaries, your attention, not your autonomy. So the moment you go quiet, the moment you stop showing up like you used to, they panic. They call you cold, bitter, even selfish, but they were never asking about the toll. They never asked how much energy it took to keep showing up for people who rarely noticed when you were the one falling apart. That's not bitterness. That's the cost of carrying in one direction for too long. Bitterness is holding on to pain, but you've released it. You've accepted what they are and what they're not. You're not waiting on apologies. You're not craving closure. You've simply decided your peace is more important than your proximity to people who exhaust you. You've stopped overextending yourself just to prove your heart was in the right place. It was. It always was. And now that heart is tired and finally being protected. If they call that bitterness, let them. Labels don't matter to the healed. What matters is that you now love yourself enough to say, "I'm done being drained." That's not bitterness. That's a boundary, and it's long overdue. Choosing distance doesn't mean you hate, it means you heal. There's a misconception that when you walk away, it must be out of hate. That when you create distance, it must be because you're holding a grudge, building walls, trying to punish someone. But sometimes the greatest act of healing is creating space between you and what hurts. Not because you want revenge, but because you finally want peace. Distance isn't a weapon, it's medicine. It's not about pushing people away, it's about pulling yourself back to safety. You didn't walk away to make anyone suffer. You walked away because staying started to feel like suffering. And somewhere deep inside, you realized that your healing couldn't coexist with the chaos they kept bringing to your doorstep. You don't hate them. You don't even wish them harm. In fact, a part of you still wishes they'd grow, that they'd reflect, that they'd wake up and realize what you were trying to give them, not just love, but loyalty, patience, honesty. But healing isn't about waiting on their awakening. It's about creating a life where your nervous system doesn't live in survival mode anymore. You chose distance not to escape, but to recover. Because every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Every interaction turned into a performance, acting calm while burning inside. You weren't being you. You were being whatever version they needed so they wouldn't get offended, angry, or distant themselves. And that kind of living isn't living, it's slow, invisible self-erasure. They say, if you really cared, you'd stay and work through it. But what they never mention is how long you did stay, how many versions of yourself you compromised, how much of your dignity you swallowed, how you silenced your own needs just to maintain some illusion of harmony. You stayed through the neglect, the inconsistency, the emotional confusion. You stayed while you bled emotionally, hoping they'd notice, hoping someone would finally see that you were drowning. But no one came, and so one day you chose distance, not because you hated them, because you couldn't keep abandoning yourself to stay close to people who never learned how to truly see you. And maybe they won't understand it. Maybe they'll call it betrayal. But you've learned that being misunderstood is a small price to pay for your mental clarity. You don't need everyone to agree with your healing, you just need to honor it. Some journeys require solitude. Some healing only happens when you step away from the noise, the drama, the false peace. This distance, it's not a punishment. It's a boundary drawn in the name of survival, a line etched in self-respect. And while they may spin the story any way they want, you're not walking around explaining anymore. You're not justifying your choice to be whole. You're not cold. You're healing. Quietly, deliberately, beautifully, and from here on out, unapologetically. Stillness doesn't mean numbness, it means strength. There's a power in your silence, now a power many mistake for numbness. They say you've stopped feeling, that you've shut down, that you no longer care the way you used to. But what they don't understand is that your stillness isn't emptiness, it's control. It's the result of finally stepping back from the storm instead of trying to calm it. You used to react. You used to defend, to explain, to emotionally unravel at every injustice, every disrespect, every cold shoulder. You used to let their chaos stir the waters inside you, but not anymore. Now you're still not because you don't feel, but because you finally refuse to be moved by what no longer deserves your energy. This stillness is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of discipline. The kind of discipline that comes after you've been pushed, tested, stretched to your limit, and somehow you're still here, stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous than before. You see things now that you once excused. You notice patterns you once justified. And instead of diving back into that emotional roller coaster, you watch from a distance, not with bitterness, not with judgment, just clarity. They think you don't care anymore because you don't argue. They think your silence is apathy because you don't explain. But what they call cold, you call evolved. You've learned that not every battle deserves a warrior, that not every insult requires a response. You no longer waste words trying to make people see your worth, you embody it. You carry it quietly, without needing applause, without demanding validation. There's strength in not needing to be understood. There's peace in letting people think what they will while you move in calm, steady truth. And yes, it confuses them, because people expect reaction. They thrive off the emotional energy you used to give so freely. And now, faced with your silence, they're forced to sit with the echoes of their own behavior, and for some, that's unbearable. Stillness is your shield now, not because you're hiding, but because you've finally stopped bleeding in places that never tried to heal you. You don't raise your voice anymore because peace has raised your standards. You don't fight for a place at tables where you were only ever tolerated. You've walked away from the performance of proving yourself, and now you rest in the quiet knowing of who you are. This isn't numbness. This is clarity wearing armor. This is self-respect without noise. This is peace with a pulse. And if they call that cold, let them. You've learned the difference between being emotionally available and being emotionally manipulated, between caring deeply and being drained completely. You've chosen stillness not because you're broken, but because you've finally healed to the point where chaos no longer feels like home. You're not cold. You're strong, you're still, and that silence, that's your strength whispering, I've survived worse and I've chosen myself. Being done isn't giving up, it's growing up. There's a sacred shift that happens when you stop fighting to be seen by those who refuse to look. When you stop pouring into relationships that never had a future, only patterns. When you stop waiting for people to treat you right out of guilt, and instead start treating yourself right out of love. That shift, that quiet, powerful, irreversible shift, is what it means to be done. And no, it's not giving up. It's not weakness. It's not failure. It's growing up. It's evolution in real time. Because there comes a moment in your life when survival isn't enough. When being tolerated no longer feels like affection. When keeping the peace starts to feel like keeping yourself in pieces. And so, without anger, without drama, and without needing anyone's permission, you simply decide, I'm done. Not done loving, not done caring, but done doing it at your own expense. Done proving your worth to people who never deserved access to it in the first place. Done shrinking yourself so others can feel tall. Done hoping that if you're kind enough, patient enough, quiet enough, they'll finally treat you the way you treat them. That version of you, the one who kept bending just to keep others comfortable, that version is gone now. And what's left isn't a colder you, it's a clearer you, a version of yourself that has outgrown the need to be chosen by people who never chose you with their actions. You've learned that you can love someone and still let them go, that you can care deeply and still walk away, that loyalty, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes self-betrayal. You're not quitting, you're graduating from old cycles, from emotional debt, from the version of you that thought staying was noble, even when staying meant suffering. And now you stand where you once broke, not with rage, but with resolve. You don't raise your voice. You don't explain your boundaries. You don't justify your peace. You simply live it, quietly, fully, unapologetically, and some won't understand. Some will say you've changed, that you're distant, that you've lost your heart. But the truth is you've found it, and you've placed it back in your own hands, where it always belonged. You've realized that growing up means making hard decisions, letting go of familiar pain, releasing people you thought would stay forever. It means choosing discomfort now for the sake of freedom later. It means being okay with disappointing others if it means finally being honest with yourself. You're not cold. You're done. You're done living small to keep others comfortable. Done offering depth to those who only knew how to skim the surface. Done trying to make it work when it was breaking you. And in that sacred declaration of done, you've stepped into something rare, something strong. Not bitterness, not hatred. Just maturity, just healing. Just a new chapter 1, where your peace finally takes the lead.